When the police came for Lydia Carmichael, no one in Coral Sands was surprised. Some even stood on their driveways, watching the flashing lights reflect off their spotless mailboxes, whispering that it was about time. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the woman being handcuffed in her own driveway wasn't a criminal. She was a mother, a small business owner, and the newest casualty in a neighborhood war waged by an HOA that had forgotten what community even meant. And to think, it all started with a patch of brown grass. The morning heat in suburban Florida came early, pressing heavy against the pastel homes of Coral Sands estates. Every lawn shimmered green, every hedge perfectly squared, and every driveway spotless enough to reflect the sky. Except one. Outside a modest single-story house on Cypress Lane, the grass had turned brittle, yellow at the edges, like it was surrendering to the relentless sun. Inside, Lydia Carmichael was juggling a work call, 2 kids, and a burnt piece of toast. Her mornings were a controlled storm, school lunches, invoices, laundry, and chaos squeezed between sips of cold coffee. She didn't notice the small yellow envelope taped to her door until late that afternoon, when her youngest son pointed it out. "Mom, someone left you a letter." The words, "Notice of Violation," were printed across the top in bold red. Lydia frowned, scanning the details. Lawn discoloration. Unclean mailbox. Prohibited vehicle, commercial van. Each item had a dollar amount next to it. $150. $200. $100. At the bottom, a line read, "Failure to correct may result in further action." Lydia sighed. The lawn was dying because the irrigation line had cracked, and she couldn't afford the repair until payday. Her old work van, the one she used for her small cleaning business, was parked outside because the garage was full of equipment. She thought, this must be a mistake. They'll understand. But Coral Sands wasn't that kind of neighborhood. There was a machine of precision, built on fear and enforced by one woman, Margaret Heller. A retiree with silver hair, sharp glasses, and an obsession with control. She chaired every meeting like a judge passing sentence. To Margaret, Lydia's brown grass wasn't a sign of bad luck, it was an act of rebellion. Days passed. Then another letter came. This time, the fines had doubled. Lydia called the HOA office, but the line went to voicemail. She left a polite message explaining that she was working to fix everything, that she just needed a little more time. No one ever called back. At the next board meeting, Margaret held up a photo of Lydia's house like evidence in a trial. "Cypress Lane, Lot 22, she said. "Still non-compliant. No improvement." The committee murmured in agreement. A man in a golf shirt asked, "Should we give her another week?" Margaret smiled thinly. "We've already given her 6. The rules are the rules." The motion passed unanimously. By the end of the month, Lydia's mailbox was filled with envelopes stamped, "Final Warning." The total fines now exceeded $600. Each notice sounded colder than the last, less like a reminder, more like a threat. Neighbors began whispering. Lydia noticed curtains move when she walked by, people avoiding eye contact. Coral Sands prided itself on order, and she was becoming the neighborhood's favorite cautionary tale. Still, Lydia kept working, long days cleaning office buildings and rental homes, saving for repairs that always cost more than she had. She'd water the dying grass late at night, whispering to herself that it would all be okay. She was wrong. The monthly HOA board meeting was always held in the community clubhouse. Pastel walls, a flag in the corner, and rows of folding chairs that smelled faintly of chlorine from the nearby pool. But that night, it felt more like a courtroom. Margaret sat at the head of the table, tapping a pen against a stack of papers. First item on the agenda, Lydia Carmichael, Lot 22. A projector displayed photos of Lydia's home, zoomed-in shots of the faded mailbox, the brown lawn, the white work van parked by the curb. "She's had 6 weeks," Margaret said, her tone firm. "No corrections, no payments. She's in violation of multiple bylaws." The board members nodded. No one wanted to challenge her. "I propose we initiate a lien on her property," Margaret continued. "It's the only language some people understand." The motion passed without debate. By morning, a process server arrived at Lydia's home, taping a new notice to her door, final notice before legal action. When Lydia read it, her stomach dropped. She'd never missed a payment before, not her mortgage, not her utilities. She didn't understand how a patch of brown grass could lead to legal threats. She tried calling the HOA office again, but the same voicemail greeted her. "Thank you for calling Coral Sands Estates. Please leave a message." No one called back. Her emails went unanswered. Days later, another letter arrived, this one from the city's code enforcement office. It cited her for habitual noncompliance and neglect of property. Lydia's hands shook as she read it. She'd never even spoken to a city inspector before. How could this happen? The answer, of course, was Margaret. Margaret had submitted a formal complaint, complete with photos and a written report accusing Lydia of defacing community standards. In counties like theirs, that language mattered. It carried legal weight. The inspector came a week later, clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting Lydia's tired face. "I'm just here to document," he said flatly. She tried to explain. "The irrigation system broke. I'm fixing it. I work full-time, I'm just behind a bit." He didn't respond. Just snapped photos, scribbled notes, and left. Within days, another envelope arrived, an official citation from the city. She now owed additional fines, due within 10 days. Lydia sat on her front steps, holding the letter, feeling like the world had turned upside down. How could a dying lawn become a criminal matter? Meanwhile, inside the gated walls of Coral Sands, the board celebrated their success. Margaret poured herself a glass of wine. "We can't let standards slip," she told another board member. "If one person ignores the rules, everyone will." But this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control. The community newsletter soon printed Lydia's address under a section titled Current Violations. Her name became public record, a scarlet letter pinned to her mailbox. Neighbors she once waved to now crossed the street to avoid her. Children whispered about the house with the dead grass. And Margaret? She watched it all unfold with satisfaction. But she wasn't done yet. Margaret filed one last complaint, this time directly to the county court. The language she used painted Lydia as negligent, irresponsible, and defiant. The paperwork moved quickly through bureaucratic hands. By the time Lydia realized what was happening, the situation had already slipped beyond her reach. If you've ever dealt with an HO like this, you know how powerless it can make you feel. Before we go further, comment below. Have you ever had a nightmare neighbor or HOA story of your own? Don't forget to subscribe and tell me, where are you watching from? Because trust me, things are about to get even worse for Lydia Carmichael. The day Lydia Carmichael was arrested began like any other. The Florida sun was already fierce by mid-morning, baking the driveways and shimmering across the neat rows of Coral Sands estates. Lydia was exhausted. She'd been working late nights to cover the mounting fines and repair bills. The lawn still refused to recover, and she was behind on nearly everything. But that morning, she allowed herself a small moment of relief. She'd just landed a new client for her cleaning business, enough to get her caught up. She climbed into her old white van, turned the key, and smiled faintly. Maybe things were finally turning around. Then she saw the flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was a routine stop. Maybe a taillight had gone out. But when the officer approached her window, his tone was firm, almost rehearsed. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle, please." Lydia blinked. What's this about?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He glanced at his tablet, then said, "There's a warrant for your arrest. Failure to appear in court on a property maintenance citation." Lydia froze. That can't be right. I didn't even know about a court date. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I just need you to step out of the vehicle." She stood there, heart pounding, as her neighbors began to gather. Curtains parted. A few people came out onto their lawns, whispering. And from across the street, behind her spotless hedge, Margaret Heller watched. Her lips curved into a faint smile as Lydia was handcuffed in her own driveway. The sound of the van door slamming echoed through the quiet neighborhood like a gavel. At the county jail, Lydia's shock turned into despair. She'd been booked under code violation, properties division. Her bond? None. Somehow, a civil dispute, a broken irrigation line, a few faded patches of grass, had turned into criminal detention. When she tried to call the HOA office, no one answered. When she asked the clerk about her case, the woman only shrugged. "It's automatic once it hits the system," she said. Automatic. The word haunted her as the hours stretched into days. Her 2 kids stayed with her sister across town. Her cleaning clients started canceling. The fines kept accumulating. The HOA didn't pause penalties just because she was behind bars. Local news briefly mentioned her arrest in a 30-second segment about property code enforcement. They showed generic footage of lawns and palm trees. No one said her name. Lydia had become a statistic, a faceless casualty of suburban perfection. But in that small jail cell, something began to shift inside her. At first it was fear, then shame, and finally, anger. She borrowed a pen from another inmate and started writing. Every date, every notice, every word she remembered from those HOA letters. She filled page after page, determined to trace the line that had turned her home into a battlefield. She didn't know it yet, but those notes would become her weapon. When she was finally released 3 weeks later, the world outside had moved on. Her mailbox was tagged with graffiti. The lawn was dead, just brittle earth. And taped to her front door was another notice, this one from the HOA's attorney. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. Lydia stood on her porch, clutching the paper, feeling like her knees might give out. But somewhere in the middle of that despair, she felt something stronger. A spark of defiance. Have you ever felt like the system was stacked against you, no matter how hard you tried to play by the rules? Because Lydia's story isn't just about one woman and her lawn anymore. It's about what happens when ordinary people are pushed too far. Stick around, because this is the part where everything starts to change. The first thing Lydia did when she got home was sit down at her kitchen table and open every single envelope she had ignored out of fear. There were over a dozen, each stamped with the HOA's emblem, a small coral seashell that now looked like a threat. Fines, liens, court fees. Every page was a new wound. She began sorting them by date, cross-referencing them with her handwritten notes from jail. That's when she realized something strange. Several of the fines had been duplicated. And the court summons that led to her arrest? It wasn't even signed properly. The HOA had bypassed a mandatory notice step, a technical violation of due process. That small discovery gave Lydia the one thing she hadn't had in months: hope. She began posting her story online, on homeowner forums, Facebook groups, anywhere someone might listen. Her first post was simple. I was arrested because my HOA didn't like the color of my grass. Within hours, comments flooded in. People from all over the country shared their own horror stories. Fines for the wrong shade of curtains, threats over Christmas decorations, warnings about the length of grass blades. One comment stood out. This sounds illegal. You should contact a lawyer. Check Florida Statute 720.305. HOAs can't criminalize violations. Lydia copied it down. By the end of that week, her story had reached local journalists. A small news blog ran the headline: Florida mom arrested over HOA fines, a community gone too far? The attention snowballed. TV reporters began showing up at Coral Sands gates. Margaret refused interviews, calling it sensationalism. At the next HOA meeting, she slammed the newsletter onto the table. She's defaming this community, she hissed. We followed every procedure. But some board members looked uneasy. The attention was bad for property values, the one thing Coral Sands worshipped above all else. For the first time, Margaret sensed cracks forming in her control. Then, out of nowhere, Lydia got a message from a lawyer named Erica Jensen. I saw your story, the message read. I handle HOA abuse cases. Let's talk pro bono. When Lydia met her, Erica was direct. I've seen this before, she said. They used the wrong statute to file against you. They turned a civil infraction into a criminal case. That's illegal. Lydia could hardly believe it. So, They can't do this? Erica shook her head. Not only can't they, we're going to prove it. Together, they began gathering evidence, copies of letters, timestamps on notices, emails that were never answered. Each piece revealed a pattern: deliberate escalation, ignored communication, and unlawful reporting to local code enforcement. It wasn't just an overzealous HOA board. It was a web of negligence and misuse of power. When Lydia went public again, this time with Erica's backing, the story exploded. YouTube channels picked it up. Podcasts debated it. News anchors said her name on national television. Coral Sands Estates, once a picture of suburban perfection, became the face of HOA corruption. The same neighbors who once ignored her now slipped letters of apology into her mailbox. Others quietly left notes of support taped to her door. For the first time, Lydia felt like she wasn't alone. Margaret watched it all unravel from behind her blinds. The neighborhood she'd ruled through fear was turning against her. Still, she told herself she'd win. She always had. But this time, her power was crumbling in the court of public opinion, and soon, it would crumble in an actual courtroom. If you're still here, this is where things get really interesting. Because next, Lydia takes her fight public, and the same HOA that once controlled her fate will finally face consequences. Comment if you think Margaret deserves what's coming. And make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss what happens in the next chapter. By midsummer, Lydia Carmichael's story had spread far beyond Coral Sands Estates. What started as a few angry Facebook posts had turned into a national conversation. Talk shows debated it. News anchors repeated her name. Podcasts used her voice clips, shaky recordings she'd posted from her kitchen table, to narrate the unraveling of a perfect neighborhood built on control and fear. She had become the accidental face of a growing movement, Homeowners Against HOA Abuse. In Coral Sands, the tension was suffocating. For the first time, the pristine lawns and pastel houses didn't look peaceful. They looked sterile, fake, like props in a play that had lost its audience. The HOA board tried to regain control. Margaret called an emergency meeting, her hands trembling slightly as she straightened her notes. "This entire thing has been blown out of proportion," she said, voice sharp. "We acted within our rights. She broke the rules. Period." But the board members weren't nodding this time. One of them, Thomas, the treasurer, finally spoke. "Margaret, she went to jail over this. There's a lawsuit. Maybe we should..." "Maybe we should what?" Margaret snapped. "Let the community decay because one woman didn't mow her lawn?" But Thomas didn't respond. He just looked away. For the first time, Margaret realized she was losing control of the narrative. Meanwhile, Lydia's case was gaining legal traction. Erica, her lawyer, filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Business and Professional Regulation, the agency that oversaw HOAs. The complaint laid everything bare: false reporting to code enforcement, improper filing of criminal charges, violation of procedural due process. Within weeks, the state opened an investigation. The court date came in late July. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed as Lydia arrived, wearing a simple blouse and carrying a folder stuffed with papers, the same ones she'd started writing in jail. Inside, the courtroom was cool and silent. Margaret sat at the defense table, her face stiff. She didn't look at Lydia. When the judge entered, the room fell still. Erica stood first. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "Your Honor, this case is not about a lawn. It's about abuse of authority. The HOA acted outside its jurisdiction, misrepresented facts to law enforcement, and cost my client her freedom, her income, and her dignity." The judge flipped through the file. Each page told a story of excess, fines, threats, violations, photos of a lawn that had become a weapon. After an hour of testimony, the judge set his pen down. "I've reviewed enough," he said. "The evidence clearly shows procedural misconduct. These charges never should have reached criminal court." He turned to Lydia. "Ms. Carmichael, this case is dismissed. Your record will be expunged." Lydia's eyes welled up. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you." Margaret stared straight ahead, her knuckles white. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Lydia. Microphones hovered, voices shouting questions. "How do you feel right now?" Lydia smiled weakly. "Relieved. But this isn't just about me. No one should lose their home or their freedom over grass." That single line made the evening news nationwide. Back in Coral Sands, the fallout was immediate. State regulators announced a full audit of the HOA's finances and governance. Margaret's name appeared in every headline. Board members began resigning one by one. Anonymous letters appeared in mailboxes calling for her removal. A recall petition circulated. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood with iron order found herself alone in her own perfect house, blinds drawn, phone ringing with reporters she refused to answer. She'd built her world on fear and rules, and now that world was collapsing around her. If you've made it this far, you've seen how one small act of defiance can expose something much bigger. Would you have fought back like Lydia did, or would you have walked away? Comment below, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories like this one. Because what happens next will change Coral Sands forever. Months later, the first rain of autumn softened the ground that had cracked under Florida's brutal summer sun. The grass outside Lydia's home began to grow again, uneven, patchy, but alive. The foreclosure notice was gone. The van was back in the driveway, still bearing the faded logo of her cleaning business. She'd lost a lot, her savings, her peace, her faith in fairness, but she'd gained something she never expected: purpose. The HOA was officially dissolved that fall. Under pressure from the investigation, the remaining board members voted to disband. In its place, residents formed a new committee, volunteer-run, transparent, focused on community instead of punishment. Margaret sold her house quietly and moved away. No one said goodbye. Her old home sat empty for weeks before a young family moved in, unaware of the legacy behind those coral-colored walls. Lydia spent her evenings rebuilding the life that had been torn apart. Her business recovered, one loyal client at a time. She started a nonprofit called Grassroots Justice, dedicated to helping homeowners fight HOA abuse. It started small, just an online forum and a few volunteers, but within months, people across the country were reaching out. Each message told a different story but carried the same pain: intimidation, unfair fines, control disguised as community. Lydia answered every one of them. Her kids grew used to reporters visiting occasionally, to neighbors stopping by just to thank her. Coral Sands had changed too. Lawns weren't all perfect anymore. Some were dry, some overgrown, but no one cared. People waved again. Children played in driveways instead of staying indoors. The silence of fear had been replaced by something better: the noise of life. One evening, Lydia stood barefoot on her front lawn. The grass was still uneven, and a few brown patches lingered stubbornly near the sidewalk. She smiled. Once, that imperfection had cost her everything. Now it reminded her how far she'd come. She whispered to herself, "They tried to bury me, but they forgot I was a seed." The sound of laughter drifted from her kids playing nearby. She looked up, the sky soft and golden after rain, and breathed deeply. She had survived the system that tried to break her. And in doing so, she had changed more than just her neighborhood. She had changed the conversation. If this story moved you, even a little, don't forget to comment, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Because stories like Lydia's aren't fiction for everyone. They're warnings. And sometimes, standing your ground, even on a patch of brown grass, is the most powerful thing you can do.